Well, now to the international kerfuffle regarding Bolivian President Evo Morales, whose plane was grounded in Austria after it was believed that Edward Snowden was on board. Bolivia said that it will file a complaint with the United Nations over what they call an act of aggression by the countries who denied airspace to the presidential jet. Bolivian President Evo Morales was in Moscow Tuesday, meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin at a summit for gas exporters. Morales boarded his private plane home only to be forced to land in Austria. Bolivia says France, Portugal, Italy, and Spain refused to let the plane cross into their airspace, believing that whistleblower Edward Snowden was aboard. No unauthorized passengers were in fact found on that plane, but President Morales and his staff, along with 4 pilots, were forced to spend the night in the Vienna airport, waiting 13 hours for permission to fly. Well, I was joined earlier by RT correspondent Mauricio Segovia from our sister Spanish station in Bolivia. I started off by asking him how Bolivians at the country's government are reacting to this.
Definitely, they're angry. You can see also deception with these European countries, and some people actually took on the streets. Many of them went straight to the French embassy here in La Paz in Bolivia, and they were yelling and they were burning French flags. They definitely weren't happy, and it's suspected that a large group of people are going to be waiting President Evo Morales at the airport tonight when he lands here in Bolivian territory.
Okay. Well, are there any plans for the government to retaliate against the countries who rescinded their airspace? Are they planning on removing any diplomats?
Well, they certainly are. Actually, the Bolivian government already said that they're planning on denouncing the situation to the UN, specifically to the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. Also, a group of lawmakers here in Bolivia, they are proposing a bill, urging the expulsion of envoys representing these 3 countries. That's France, Italy, and Portugal, not Spain, though.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. Why did they suspect that Snowden was even on the plane with President Morales?
Well, actually, everything started at RT. President Evo Morales was in Moscow 2 days ago, and he actually gave an exclusive interview to RT. There he said that he was willing to consider any, well, if Mr. Snowden asked for asylum, he was willing to consider that. But he did say that at that time, the country didn't get Snowden didn't get in touch with the country and therefore didn't ask for asylum.
Okay. Mauricio, thank you so much. We have to leave it there. That was RT correspondent Mauricio Segovia. Edward Snowden's revelation of the NSA's surveillance program has given Americans proof that the government is collecting information and data on its own citizens. He revealed PRISM, the NSA spy program that's used to monitor internet connections, searches some of the largest technology companies like Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and more. Plus, they released documents showing the government collects metadata on all Americans' phone calls. These revelations raise serious concerns about Americans' Fourth Amendment rights, which guards them against unreasonable search and seizure. But as reporters who've used Snowden as a source here call for their own prosecution, the First Amendment rights to a free and open press are also being called into question. For more on this, I was joined earlier by CEO and President of Free Press, Craig Aaron. I asked him if this treatment of Snowden was going to have any impact on future journalists and whistleblowers.
Absolutely. I think that there is a major chilling effect if you talk to any investigative reporter trying to cover national security, trying to cover matters of national importance. They'll tell you their sources are starting to clam up because not just because of Snowden, but because of the repeated attacks on journalists for doing their jobs, the prosecution of whistleblowers. It's becoming a lot harder to get information about what the government is doing. Now, we have these blockbuster revelations, which raise huge questions of First Amendment rights, Fourth Amendment rights, but I think for reporters and the press, there's a lot of concern about are they going to be able to get these stories and what kind of risk are they taking just to do their jobs as journalists.
Okay. Well, I want to bring you now to something that you said. I've got a quote from you. You said that our rights to connect and communicate are in serious jeopardy. I'm assuming that you meant that in regards to the revelations of the NSA scandal. How so, Craig?
Well, I think you can just look at the evidence that's been revealed in the Snowden revelations and other recent stories. You're seeing a massive dragnet sweeping up data for all of us, our phone calls, records of who we called, when we called them, and where we were when we made those calls. Our internet activities are being swept up by these massive computers where the government can look in them at any time. I think this goes beyond anything we've seen before in terms of the basic communications of Americans being monitored and watched. And we haven't yet gotten real answers about why this is happening. We haven't truly had that public debate, and I think it's very concerning. And I think our First Amendment rights, freedom of the press, are absolutely part of this. We need reporters out there on the beat, doing their jobs, finding out and printing things that the government would actually prefer we don't know.
Well, on Monday, Craig, the Washington Post editorial board wrote that Snowden's leaks should stop, and they said, quote, I want to take you to one of their quotes, the first U.S. priority should be to prevent Mr. Snowden from leaking information that harms efforts to fight terrorism and conduct legitimate intelligence operations. But the Post then published the leaking information that supposedly harms these efforts. Why does the editorial board and the news side of the Post, why do they have such differing opinions?
Well, I guess the positive version is, well, at least the editorial side isn't telling the news side what to do. And otherwise we wouldn't have these stories. So that's the good version. I think the bad version is we're seeing this whole wave of what I call journalists against journalism starting to come up. People who are defending this administration and attacking those putting out the stories. I think that's a real concern. That doesn't mean Mr. Snowden shouldn't answer. He was a government employee. He gave information a way that he wasn't supposed to. I think he should answer for that. But to take that to the level of espionage, to take it to the level of downing the planes or preventing the planes of flying of foreign leaders, I think that's a whole different question, and one that needs to actually be debated in public. I think there's a lot of real concerns. I was very disappointed in the Post's editorial stance because I think the real story here, and put Snowden aside, is massive NSA surveillance and spying on the American people. That's what we need answers for.
Certainly. All right. So we've heard for calls of the arrest of journalist Glenn Greenwald for the way that he published the stories given to him. Do you think that he published those leaks responsibly?
Based on everything I know, absolutely. I think that, we should be thanking Glenn Greenwald. He did what you're supposed to do. Find sources and report the news. That's what journalists do. That's what reporters do. We'll learn more about Snowden's revelations as this story develops. But I think it's very clear that Glenn Greenwald and his colleagues, as well as the Washington Post, McClatchy, and others, they're furthering this story, and they need our gratitude. And they're doing what journalists are supposed to do, printing information the government doesn't necessarily want in public. That's the job of any journalist paying attention to national security. And I think all of us should be glad that people like Glenn Greenwald are doing that kind of work. Otherwise, we wouldn't really know the scale and scope of this spying operation.
Okay. We just have moments left here, Craig. One final question. The media's narrative, they seem to be covering every aspect of Snowden himself, but not the real story of the NSA. Why do you think that is?
I think it's an easier story to tell. I think it doesn't actually threaten people in power. I think the real story, though, what is going on, how is this massive surveillance happening? That's the story the American people need to know. They've gotten pieces of it from The Guardian. They need a lot more reporters paying a lot less attention to what Snowden had for lunch and a lot more attention to this spying program.
Craig, really appreciate you weighing in. We have to leave it there. That was Craig Aaron, President and CEO of Free Press. Edward Snowden has no shortfall of supporters in exposing the NSA surveillance scandal. Among them, his father, Lon Snowden, and former CIA whistleblower John Kiriakou, who is currently serving himself a 30-month sentence for leaking information about the CIA torture program to the New York Times. Well, both men have written open letters to Edward Snowden, reflecting strong support and advice on what his next step should be. In Lon Snowden's letter, which he wrote with his attorney Bruce Fein, he said this about his son, quote, "You are a modern-day Paul Revere, summoning the American people to confront the growing danger of tyranny and one branch of government." Meanwhile, Kiriakou offered advice from his own experience in a letter to Snowden. He told the NSA whistleblower he should hire the best attorney that he can, start a website to tell his side of the story to the public, and never, ever trust the FBI. Kiriakou wrote, quote, "They will pretend to be people they are not, supporters, well-wishers, and friends, all the while wearing wires to record your out-of-context statements to use against you. The FBI is the enemy. It's a part of the problem, not the solution."